guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I have yet another movie review, so I hope you'll find this one interesting. This is a drama slash horror from Australia, English language, released in the year 2014, directed by Nick Kazakis and Costa Alces, and this movie is called The Plague. So Plague is basically set in the Australian remote tablelands, so it's not the outback, but it's in a very sort of the mountain sort of areas, or hill areas, and you've got a band of survivors who have escaped the city because there has been a zombie apocalypse, sort of a zombie outbreak, more like a 28 days later infected outbreak. So the cities are very, very dangerous. So this group of survivors have decided to go out to the countryside and seek shelter in this little tin shack. So they see that there's not many zombies around, and that they're going to wait it out and see if the situation gets any better. So you've got the main character who's waiting for her husband, who they lost contact with, so she's hoping he's still alive. And then you've got some other survivors that band together. Now they want to go out. They want to go out into the highway and get to the coast, because they deem that this is just a death trap. They're just waiting to die because they've got no supplies. But the main character says, no, we have to stay here, it's too dangerous. So the others end up going anyway, and they're never heard from again. So this female's left by herself, and she starts to really panic because she doesn't know what to do. But then all of a sudden there's a knock on the shed, and it turns out to be this woman's husband. So they're back together, but they don't know what they're going to do. They're running out of supplies. Then one evening, just when they're about to give up on their own lives, there is a car that comes by, and a stranger is driving it. This stranger has a lot of supplies. He has guns, and he says that with him they can be very safe. So as the days pass, it starts to become clear that this stranger has hidden motives. He might not be the person they first thought he was, and maybe he is not there to protect them. So they have to assess whether or not they're in more danger being with this guy or taking their chances out in the highways. So whether or not that is the case is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Plague. I was very interested by this film. Now, it is a low-budget Australian horror film, and once again, this one passed me by, as is the case with many other Australian films. They don't get a lot of marketing, so Plague didn't really get the marketing that I think it deserves, because it is a different kind of film as far as the zombie subgenre is concerned. It's not a tired, generic sort of film. So if you like typical zombie horror fest, then maybe Plague is definitely not for you, because this movie is much more of a character study about stressful situations and about these sort of situations bringing out the true self. So that's what I appreciated about it. Now, it does have its negatives, which I'll go into a little bit later, but this movie is very aware of the limitations it has. It's a low-budget horror film, but it doesn't try anything too ambitious. So it has a very, it has one setting, and it has a very limited amount of characters. So that is why the movie works, and that's why it has a strong, realistic approach, is because a lot of these filmmakers in zombie films will do the broad area, so you see everything, and it just tries too hard, and you can really see that it's cheap. But in this movie, it forces you to use your imagination. So you've got this area that seems to be safe, and you're hearing these stories about how the cities have gone to hell, and you're forced to use your imagination. And sometimes your imagination can magnify that, it can intensify it, without you even needing to see it. So this is one of the occasions where they utilise that sort of low-budget approach, and they make it a little bit different. Now, immediately I got comparisons with a British horror film called Before Dawn, which I really liked. Once again, that was very limited characters, because it's a low-budget horror film, and that was centred upon the two main characters in a house, and then outside you're imagining what's going on. So if you like Before Dawn, you will like the way that Plague is approached, but I think Before Dawn was a little bit better because the characters were a little bit more drawn out, and they're a little bit more relatable and interesting. But in this movie, there are some scenes of zombies, but as I said, it does play second fiddle. So what I liked about it, it had a very strong script, and it had me thinking a lot about, life, what is their afterlife. But while it's thought-provoking, it doesn't preach it. So it's not trying to force-feed its ideas to you. It's just having those ideas out there, and you can take them on if you want. So the characters, as I said, is my biggest problem. Is that the script is very good, but the characters aren't fleshed out enough. The main character, who does a fantastic job, the actress who played the main character, I can't recall her name, she does a great job, but unfortunately she's the only really interesting character. You've got her husband, who's very, he's a weasel-like figure, he's very cowardly, but you don't really care about him. And then the stranger that comes along, as soon as this stranger comes along, there's a strong sense of suspense, and you kind of think to yourself, what's this guy's intention? Is he going to harm these people, or is he actually there to help them, and he's just scared about the situation like everybody else? So not knowing what this guy is doing, that brought a lot of suspense in without anything happening. It's a very creepy atmosphere that the movie has, and I thought it worked well. But as I said, a lot of people are going to be put off because this is not really a zombie film. It has a zombie idea of the zombie outbreak, but it's about these people coping. It's about betrayal, it's about who you can trust, and the fear transforming us into a different person, sometimes from the good or sometimes for the bad. And in this case, some of the characters do go down different paths, and you root for certain characters by the decisions that they make. So some of the decision making was a little bit irritating. I will say some of the characters were irritating as well. Just the fact that this husband especially was so cowardly. I just didn't really care for him. Didn't care if he died, to be honest. I didn't care if anyone else died, but I actually cared about the main character. So at least that was something. So as I said, Before Dawn, you really get the sense that in that movie the marriage was authentic, although in this film it actually feels like the relationship between the two main characters was force-fed. It actually felt like they were acting a relationship rather than actually feeling like the chemistry was natural. And that was my problem with it, is that I didn't believe them as a couple. I just believed them as two strangers who have met for the first time. It just didn't have that click, and that's why I didn't like that sort of relationship at first. So as the movie goes along, it does unfortunately get stuck. It does bog down a little bit, and it does drag. It sort of goes through the motions. I thought first 15 minutes were absolutely fantastic. It created an absolutely perfect sense of doom, dread, and you didn't know what, if it was safe to go out. So they were always staying in. But unfortunately, there is a really shocking scene of violence in the first 15 minutes, but after that really shocking scene, it just goes down into a lull, and it feels like it doesn't know how to elevate itself to the point of being an edge-of-your-seat thriller. And there were some scenes that promised to be edge-of-your-seat, but they're not really capitalised. So it actually felt like these two directors didn't know exactly how to deliver this movie on a horror front. But they delivered on a psychological character study drama fairly well. As I said, the script was very good, but unfortunately there are moments, especially in the middle of the film, that just drag, and then all of a sudden you start to forget that there's a threat outside, because the hillsides, it's a beautiful sort of landscape, but it doesn't feel like it's in destruction. It doesn't feel like there's a threat, because there are no zombies to be seen anywhere. So you kind of feel to yourself, well, okay, I'm forgetting about all the threat, and now I'm just watching these people try and come to terms with this horrible situation. But because I can't feel the horrible situation, I can't put myself in their shoes, therefore I'm not really feeling the tense atmosphere that the directors probably want you to feel. So that was my biggest problem with it, is that I thought it was a little bit too dialogue based, and that wouldn't have been a problem if the characters were really interesting. But unfortunately, if you don't have very interesting characters and you're having a lot of dialogue and a lot of exchanges between these characters, it just becomes a little bit boring, and it becomes a little bit tedious. Fortunately, it doesn't ruin the film, because it does have a lot of good ideas. As far as a low-budget horror film is concerned, it is very well shot. I just would have liked a little bit more of the horror aspect put into it, just to remind us that things are really bad, because in the halfway point, nothing bad. You don't see any destruction, you don't see any zombies. You just feel to yourself, yeah, these are people who are camping out for the weekend, and things are going wrong. So you don't really feel a lot of authentic sort of threat. You don't feel authentic relationships, and in the end that does derail it a little bit. It's not a brilliant film. The end of the movie was okay. I thought it contradicted the main character's behaviour a little bit, that I'm not going to go into. I don't want to spoil it. But at the end of the film, you think to yourself, yeah, I saw a reasonably good low-budget horror film, but unfortunately, you can't help but feel at the back of your mind that it really should have been a lot better. And if it just had a little bit more of a thrilling aspect, a horror aspect, it would have complemented the dialogue-based sort of character study. Because the character study on its own, it doesn't quite keep afloat, but fortunately, it doesn't derail it at the same time. So I will say go out there and see it, only for a very acquired taste. If you're a die-hard fan of zombie films, gore films, then I would say be very careful. There are some pretty shocking scenes of violence, but they're very few and far between. This is more a case of seeing people transform into, bringing out the real self. They say in stressful situations, your real self will come out, and that's what the film illustrates, and I thought it was interesting enough to warrant at least one viewing. So overall, for Plague, I'm going to give it 3 stars. Go out there and see it. Alright guys, it's my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.